I would like to here share a few incidents that took place at Sri Ramanasramam in which I too was involved. In a way, these were all connected with Chadwick. After my graduating from college in 1956, my father asked me to study further. I refused, saying I would rather work and earn some money, as our family was then going through some financial difficulties. From 1956 to 1958, I was staying in Tiruvannamalai and trying my level best to get a job. Major Chadwick and Mrs. Teliarkin also tried to give me help getting a job, but the higher power had a different scheme for me. During those 2 years, I moved closely with all the old devotees who lived in Tiruvannamalai, such as Chadwick, Arthur Osborne, Murunganar, S.S. Cohen, and Devaraja Mudaliar, as well as Professor G.V. Subramaya, who used to regularly visit the ashram. Something about them aroused in me tremendous awe, wonder, and interest. I used to pester them with the question, "What did you talk to Bhagavan about? What was Bhagavan's relationship with you?" Sometimes they answered lightly and took some time off to tell me little bits. I used to get excited and would feel impelled to request them to write all these precious gems down so they wouldn't get lost. Many of them demurred, saying, "Who am I and what can I say?" And I used to plead with them, "Who is going to be worried about you? It is about Bhagavan, what he told you, and what his relationship was with you. You owe a responsibility to posterity by preserving these remarkable reminiscences. Please note them down." I am very grateful to Chadwick because he was the only one who encouraged me. On many a day when there were no crowds or much work to be done at the ashram, he would make me sit next to him and narrate a thrilling incident. I did not know then that after narrating each incident, he was going to his room and noting it down in a notebook. And in 1958, I went away from Tiruvannamalai to take a 2-year postgraduate course in philosophy. Before I left, Chadwick told me, "Thank you. I have noted all these reminiscences in a notebook." And after my post-graduation, I worked for a few months and came back in 1960 to live in Ramana Ashramam. The very first thing that I did was to go straight to Chadwick's room and tell him, "Give me your prasad, that notebook in which you have written everything." This notebook of Chadwick's was the first book of reminiscences that was published. A few days after the book was released, I received a letter of thanks from Chadwick in which he wrote, "There is no tradition in our ashram to dedicate the book to a person of one's choice, for every book is an offering to Bhagavan, dedicated to the holy feet of Sri Bhagavan. If there would have been such a custom, I would certainly have dedicated this book to you, dear Ganesan." By that time, I had become so close to the old devotees that another person, G.V. Subramaya, listened to me and said, "I am writing my reminiscences in my mother tongue, Telugu." And I replied, "What is the use if you write it only in Telugu? You are an English professor. Translate it into English too." This was the second book of reminiscences. He had it published outside, but I pleaded with him and subsequently got its future editions published by Ramana Ashramam. A cascade of reminiscences followed. There was T.K. Sundaresa Iyer's At the Feet of Bhagavan, Devaraja Mudalayar's My Recollection of Bhagavan Sri Ramana, Sri Nagama's My Life at Sri Ramana Ashramam, then those of Kunju Swami, Balarama Reddy, and others. The spiritual food was theirs. I was the lucky one, blessed to be the spoon that served it to the hungry spiritual seekers. No doubt it was Bhagavan's grace that such things should happen. If the teachings of the Buddha, Jesus Christ, and Sri Ramakrishna were not recorded by their chosen devotees and disciples, How could we have known them? If these reminiscences about Bhagavan Ramana are with us today, it is primarily thanks to Chadwick, and then to all the other devotees who acceded to my fervent and persistent pleas to record them. These books of reminiscences bring out the relationship between a Satguru and his surrendered disciples. They are very precious because the true stories contained in them bring the teaching closer to us. How does one put that verbal teaching into practice? We need a lot of encouragement to practice the verbal teaching. Otherwise, one Bible, one Quran, and one Bhagavad Gita would have been enough. That is why the reminiscences of these old devotees, how they lived with the Master, and how the Master, through his pure living, taught the truth, is important to us. Chadwick had a unique relationship with the Master. I said to him, "Tell me what Bhagavan looked like when you saw him and moved with him. What was it that struck you most?" And he said, "Bhagavan was a very beautiful person who shone with a visible light or aura. He had the most delicate hands I have ever seen with which he could express himself. One might almost say that he could talk with his hands. His features were regular, and the wonder of his eyes was famous. His forehead was high, and the dome of his head the highest I have ever seen. In India, this is known as the Dome of Wisdom, and it was only natural that it should be so with our beloved Bhagavan. His body was well formed and of only medium height, but this was not apparent, as his personality was so dominant that one looked upon him as tall. He had a great sense of humor, and while talking, a smile was never far from his face. He had many jokes in his repertoire and was a magnificent actor. He would always dramatize the protagonist of any story he related. When people came to him with their family stories, he would laugh with the happy, and at times shed tears with the bereaved. In this way, he seemed to reciprocate the emotions of others always. He never raised his voice, and if he did occasionally seem angry, there was no sign of it on the surface of his piece. Talk to him immediately afterwards, and he would answer calmly and quite undisturbedly. He did not speak unceasingly and unnecessarily. His apparent silence only showed how much foolish chatter usually goes on amongst us. Bhagavan preferred every sort of simplicity and preferred to sit on the floor, but a couch had been forced on him, and this became his home for most of the 24 hours of the day. Bhagavan would never allow any preferences to be shown to him. He would wander out on the hill a few times a day, and if any attachment to anything on earth could be said of him, it was surely an attachment to the hill. He loved it and said it was God himself.